Welcome to the official podcast of DogsDaily.com, a Sports Illustrated channel.
Gets to the edge. Sonny Michel will send the Dogs home to the championship game.
If you're looking for the latest Georgia Bulldog news in football, basketball, baseball, and recruiting, then you're in the right place.
Anthony Edwards hit the jam. Are you kidding me?
Hosted by Dogs Daily writers Jeremiah Stoddard, Kyle Funderburk, and Jonathan Williams.
Here's a pitch. Hit high out into right center with some carry. It's got a chance. This ball is out of here. Tucker Bradley has won it.
Just sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for these hot takes you're about to listen to.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Classic City Sports. As always, Jeremiah Stoddard along with Jonathan Williams here. Action-packed episode for you this week. So, obviously we're going to cover the first half, second half, offense, defense of Missouri performance against Missouri this past weekend. We're going to touch base on some conversations that everyone seems to want to talk about right now, and that's the JT versus Stetson Bennett conversation. They both got to play in the Missouri game, so we'll segue into that a little bit in the middle part. And then we'll wrap everything up of the episode in the talking about what to look for. What are we, kind of expecting against Tennessee this coming weekend? It is the last SEC game of the season, the regular season, because they have clinched their spot to the SEC championship game. So that's happening already. So the last regular season game against an SEC opponent before they roll into Charleston Southern and Georgia Tech to wrap everything up for the whole season. So we'll go ahead and, without waiting any longer, just go ahead and jump straight into it. So offensively for Georgia versus Missouri, initial thought for you?
It got really sloppy to begin with. It was clear that Georgia could not get their run game going throughout the entirety of the game, but in the first half, it was real rough for them. I mean, offensive line was just getting whooped. They were stacking like 8 guys in the box every single down, basically saying, if you're going to beat us, we're going to make Stetson Bennett beat us with his arm. So then once you saw them get into their third possession of the game, you saw Todd Monken making some adjustments. He's like, all right, well, if you want to put it in the box, we'll just beat you over the top with our guys like Arian Smith and Jermaine Burton, and we'll hit you over the top. And that's exactly what they did. Got some big explosive plays, put some points on the board. But, yeah, offensive line struggled. They definitely did. Not having Jamari Sawyer in there after his injury, putting in Broderick Jones, which is a good thing. Broderick Jones is getting reps at left tackle, which is what a lot of people have been wanting to see. And he, for the most part, he held his own. But, I mean, as a collective unit in the run game, they're still just not figuring things out. Things just aren't exactly clicking, being pretty inconsistent there. But other than that, they did their job. They put the points on the board just like they need to, did what they needed to for their defense to help them win the game as well. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that's been the storyline for Georgia lately as far as the defense being able to really kind of close things out for them, but also just the offense kind of getting off to a little bit of a slower start. Mm-hmm. We were talking about this before the show started, and because I've noticed, the last 3 games, Georgia's offense has kind of struggled a little bit to get started. Couple games ago, what was it, Auburn? We were talking about Auburn. Or no, hold on. I lost track of who was it? Kentucky. That's right. Yeah. Kentucky was, a 0-0 game, or is that what we said?
Yes, 0-0.
0-0 game at the end of the first quarter. Florida was also a 0-0 game at the end of the first quarter. And, this past weekend, it was a low-scoring 3-7 game. Georgia did take the lead, at least in that one in the first quarter. But compared to how they started earlier in the season, they were just absolutely blowing the doors off immediately against teams. They've kind of shifted that. The second quarter has been where they've actually started scoring a lot more of their points this year. In fact, that's the quarter they score most of their points out of all of them in the entire, game. Each game, the second quarter is the best game or best quarter for them as far as scoring goes. So they've kind of figured some stuff out. I guess they're kind of filling out these teams as you start getting through your SEC schedule. Start getting a little bit tired, as it all continues to go. And so you start really looking at what the team's throwing out there before you start really just throwing everything back, which I think is not a bad way to look at it, especially when it's working as it has been right now. And yeah, against Florida, what really helped them in the second quarter was that defense. So like I said, that seems to be like the way things have worked for Georgia this year as a whole, is their defense really is, the defining factor of what's happening in most of these games. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's something that people really need to start looking at as this may just be the identity of this team.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it. This team is very capable of winning a national championship based on that identity. So this offense is still scoring 38 points a game. Yeah, a lot of that could be because of that defense, but it doesn't matter how they're scoring the points. What matters is they're scoring 38 points a game. If the defense is carrying them to that's all that matters. Like, they're still getting that 38 points a game. They're still dominating teams like Missouri and Kentucky and even Florida by the end of it when you sit here and get through it all. They've got one more big matchup coming up with Tennessee, which we'll talk about again. But the offense overall, like, you can't even be mad about it. We'll get into the conversation about quarterbacks comparison in a minute as well. But you can't be mad at JT or at Stetson early in that game either.
No.
He may have had a couple plays early on that were struggling in the first quarter, but he answered with a beautiful pass to Arian Smith in the back left corner of the end zone on a ball that nobody had any chance of getting except him. And he basically just said, "Go get it, track star." That's what he said. And it worked out, and then he, like you said, he follows it up with another deep ball down to Jermaine Burton. This offense is showing that they are scoring in chunk plays, and he's not scared to throw it downfield. One of the things that everybody talked about with JT and stuff was his ability to just chunk it downfield and let receivers like George Pickens and stuff go up. I do think that, Stetson's getting a lot better about that, and it really did show in this game as well.
Yeah, I think people really undervalue the strength of Stetson's arm. I mean, he launched that ball to Arian Smith, and then, it was high in the air, I think around 55 yards that he threw the thing, and towards the back end of the end zone as well. So, he had to put some heat under that thing, and he did, and he dropped it right in Arian Smith's hands, dropped it right in the bucket. And then here's a crazy stat for you. Arian Smith has 5 career catches at UGA, and 3 of them are touchdowns. So
they're all chunk plays.
Well, yeah. So what does
that
mean?
They're all deep balls.
If you're a defense and Arian Smith is on the field, you better be looking out, because if he's on the field, they're looking to take a deep shot probably to the end zone, and he will cook you. He will burn you down the field like nobody's business. But yeah, overall the offense is. And here's the thing: is talking about the defense helping them out with points. It's one thing to have a really good offense that can put up points for you. But it's great teams that have, where every single game where you get a special team score or you get a defensive score. And Georgia has been doing that consistently. Just this last week, they almost had another special teams touchdown. They got the safety still, but they blocked yet another punt.
Dan Jackson missed another punt.
Dan Jackson may never get
the end zone.
Dan Jackson may never get his first career touchdown, and I hate it for him. He came so close twice now and just can't get it done.
Twice on a block punt standing in the end zone.
It was right there and just couldn't do it. But that's what great teams do, and Georgia has been finding success in that area in the past and recently. And so when you're creating turnovers and when you're creating points not on offense, that's a sign of a really great team. Yeah. And so to add on to your offense putting up 35 points a game, and then you can add on another 7 without them having to be on the field, that's a big deal. So yeah, it may not be always the offense, and you can say the defense is bailing them out in a sense, but that's just what a great team does. And like I said, this offense is still putting up points on their own. They're not struggling in that aspect at all.
No, they're not struggling at that at all. But and like I said, yeah, the defense might help them out a little bit in as far as putting some points on the board, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how they put the points on the board. If they're getting good field position because the defense steps up like they did in Florida, and so they scored 2 touchdowns off of one play, drives because of where they got the ball. You can't take away that one of those 2 touchdowns. One of was an 11-yard run, which was a nice run by Cook. The other one was a 40-yard pass from Stetson Bennett. That was a beautiful dime, actually pretty similar to the same play that Arian Smith scored on. It was like a flag route to the back left corner of the end zone, and it cooked the defense on that too. So you can't take anything away from that. It was one play and it was because of field position, but it was a great play to get it. And it's Georgia showing that they are trying to be that explosive offense that everybody wanted to have, that every Georgia fan out there was wishing to have. They are explosive. They're scoring all these points and still running about 63 to 65 plays a game, which is a low. That's a small number of plays to be going and scoring this fast. They don't get a ton of drives where they're having double-digit plays. They have those. They can do that. They'll have 7-minute drives, 12-play drives and stuff like that, and they can get that. Think about what they were able to do. It wasn't quite that long, but they were able to cook away the game against Clemson, if we want to go way back into the beginning of the season, where they needed it, and they just started grinding out yards and getting first downs with Zamir White just absolutely putting his head down. They can do that, but they're showing that they're scoring on an explosive and big play type offense as well. And I think that's something that Georgia fans aren't paying attention to. They're so focused on the quarterback discussion and all of that. They're not paying attention to, they have the offense that they want. Whether or not they have the right guy at quarterback that they want to have at quarterback or something like that, it doesn't really matter. They're still scoring plenty of points. They're still going to be winning all of these games. They're going to have a good game against Tennessee here as well, which we'll break that down in a few minutes as well. But the offense definitely is not shabby. It definitely deserves the respect. And honestly, Stetson Bennett deserves his respect that he's been able to get this team where he has, throwing for another 255 yards on 11 for 19 or something like that. I'll have to look back again, but something of that nature, or 13 for 19, I think. And just no interceptions, 2 touchdowns, I believe. It was a good game for him.
Yeah, and I think I think we should go ahead and transition into the quarterback conversation.
Yeah, let's just go ahead.
Because
I keep flirting with it.
Well, and also like we can talk about the defense all day long, but the bottom line is we're just going to tell you the same things that we've been talking about all year. The defense dominated. Nakobe Dean made a play. Like everybody flashed. Like that's what this defense is at this point. It's no secret. So let's talk about the topic that everybody wants to hear and talk about that. So we said last week that these next 4 games, including the Missouri game, was going to be big to tell what Georgia was going to be doing at their quarterback situation, what they were wanting to do. Basically saying if JT Daniels is playing, that's probably a sign of, all right, we want to kind of get him back in the mix, see what he can do, maybe try and transition him back in that starting spot. If you're not seeing JT Daniels, then it's pretty obvious that they're just going to settle in with Stetson Bennett for whatever reason, whether that means JT Daniels wasn't healthy or whatnot. So you get to see JT Daniels. And I think a lot of people were surprised almost to see him struggle a little bit. I, for one, was not. I don't think you were either.
No, we've talked about this. You and I have talked about this.
And Kirby Smart has been saying, we're waiting on JT Daniels and we're not going to put him – he can't be the starter right now because he's rusty. I mean, like we said, this guy, JT Daniels, has not played in about a month until Saturday. You're not just – you can't – it's a big difference between getting practice reps and in-game reps on Saturday. There's a big difference between that. And so then people were like, oh, well, I guess we're not going to let JT Daniels throw the ball, just letting him throw screens and all these slant routes and dig routes. Like, okay, well, you're not going to throw JT Daniels in there on his first possession and say, all right, here we go, 40-yard deep shot. Let's see what you got, JT. You're not going to do that. You got to get him settled in.
He's into the game.
Exactly. And there's a reason why he was a little late on one of his throws that ended up in an interception. There's a reason for that. It's getting adjusted to that game speed again, which is why he's getting reps, why he got reps against Missouri. A great time to get him reps. Game was out of hand. Stetson Bennett and the offense did their job. And so now you get to experiment a little bit with JT Daniels, get him comfortable, even got to take some hits again. Like, that's a big deal for him. He's not taking hits in practice, so he got to be in an in-game situation, have guys coming after him, taking some shots. That's good for him, get his body back to that. So if you were surprised that JT Daniels struggling a little bit or irritated at the play call, you shouldn't have been for either, because it should have just been expected. Because when you're like JT Daniels and you haven't played in a while, you're not going to go in there and just baptize him with fire and throw in like a 50-yard bomb downfield or whatever. Like, it's not going to happen.
No, absolutely not. And to be honest with you, though, as fans, you should look at it and say that Georgia let him come into a game that was a within grasp game that you weren't concerned about, that you were winning by a decent amount. They let him throw 11 times.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they put him out there and said, all right, we're going to just let him hand it off. They let him throw the ball. Mm-hmm. He threw the ball 11 times. I mean, Stetson only threw it 19. I mean, yeah, he threw it more, obviously, but he started the game and he was putting the team away. You handle the game a little bit differently, but the thing you should be happy about is they did let him get in there and throw the ball. Now, this was the question that I had going into it as well, and I was talking to one of my other buddies, and I said, I guess we'll find out soon what the answer to this question is, as the game was starting, and it was, are we going to see JT Daniels today? The question will be this: if JT Daniels comes into the second half or at all in the game, that means he's healthy. That was the question. Was he healthy and not playing, and they kept going with Stetson Bennett? Or was he maybe still dealing with something and they're not trying to put him out there into the live game action yet? The answer to that question was he's healthy. They went with Stetson Bennett because they felt like he was the right guy to start right now. As you said, JT Daniels came in and he was rusty. Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone's arguing with that. I think everyone actually is admitting that he looked a little rusty. He did throw his interception, and he had a little bit of a rocky start to it. So that's not a bad thing, though. That's not me taking a shot at JT Daniels. Like you said, we both talked about you've got to ease him back into it and see what he's going to be able to do and actually let him get comfortable at game speed before you start letting him start games and where it's extremely tight, and a potential pick like that could have been crucial. Think about if it was a 7-point game, first quarter, second quarter, and all of a sudden they score before halftime and take the lead and they get the ball back or something like that. And all of a sudden the game just really shifts. The momentum shifts while it's still not, grasped yet. Like, it's not a win yet. Like, you don't know what's going to happen yet. If that happens in those moments, at that point, it's a big discussion and a lot scarier of a moment. And this one, they let him actually do it late in the game, and he was still throwing it. Yeah, he made his mistake, but that's okay. Like, it is.
And this is something that isn't new with Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart has talked about getting guys back to game speed all season long. Earlier in the season, when a lot of our wide receivers are banged up, more specifically Kyrus Jackson and I believe Jermaine Burton, Kirby Smart was like, you're not seeing them right now because we've got it. They're not in game speed conditioning right now. They're not in that conditioned form to be playing in games right now. That just tells you, like, one, Kirby Smart and them take that very seriously. They don't want to just throw guys back out there and use that as their form of getting them back into shape. And two, like, they can be cautious with this. You have Stetson Bennett, so you're allowed to be cautious with JT Daniels. You're not having to just say, all right, here you go. You're back in the offense. Like, let's see what you can do. You got to win us a football game, play all 4 quarters. You got to look great. You don't have to do that. When you have Stetson Bennett, you can take some of the pressure off of JT Daniels when he goes back in there and just take it almost as a practice moment, but in a live game situation. And that's that's a huge thing to have for a team at this point in the season, to where you are able to give JT Daniels those reps right now, and you're not having to be like so nitpicky about it, I guess you could say. So, but that's a big thing, is Kirby Smart has emphasized getting guys back to game speed. And that's what they were doing with JT Daniels. And that should get Georgia fans excited about, is that they're getting JT Daniels back to game speed right now.
Absolutely. And with that being said, this is just my opinion. This isn't going to be like sourced or anything like that. But even based on what we just saw this past weekend, it's just what I think is what I think the plan is for JT Daniels. I do feel that JT Daniels is the guy that they want to be starting in an SEC championship game. I do think that that's who they want to potentially run out there. The question of whether or not that's going to happen, I don't know yet, because I think that depends on how JT Daniels progresses and how Stetson Bennett continues to play over the next 3 games as well, to determine who they think is going to be the most steady and consistent going into that game, so they don't come in there and start, making errors early in the game that puts you in a bad spot. Against a team like Alabama, you won't be able to recover in that spot if you put yourself down early on or something like that. So that'll be what really decides that at the end of it. But what I think is going to happen as far as getting JT Daniels ready to potentially do that is, I think that this next weekend you see something very similar to what we just did. I think you see Georgia run out there with Stetson Bennett to start the game, and I see in the second half you see JT Daniels come back out there and open up the offense a little bit more. And I think even you potentially see it even if you don't necessarily have a 20-point lead or something like that. I think you see it just because they're trying to get him into the game more regardless. And so that's something that they'll sit there and judge his progression of, maybe he's a little bit faster on it. Maybe he doesn't throw a little bit slower and end up throwing an interception this week. And so it shows that he's getting ready for it. Then you turn over to a Charleston Southern game and you potentially start him there. You either start him there or you potentially put him in like the second quarter. And then come Georgia Tech, at that point, he's got to be starting that game. If you're going to start, whoever starts the Georgia Tech game is starting against Alabama or whoever it is in the SEC championship game. That I will say with pretty strong confidence.
I think that's the guy that they'll roll with through the remainder of the season. Not just the SEC championship game, but I think that's who they're saying is their guy from that point out. And you won't see any more quarterback rotation probably after that, in my opinion.
Not more than like what you would see in a blowout type situation or like a dire need situation kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree. Yeah, I think that's exactly what that game will tell us. I think by Georgia Tech is when you'll actually see who that quarterback is. What's going to decide that, though, is how this next game goes against the Tennessee team. And when you see JT Daniels roll out there to start the game, which we talked about this earlier, we can kind of segue this into the conversation about Tennessee as well, because it kind of fits. And if you see something similar to what we've seen in the past couple of years against Tennessee, where Georgia seems to be slower in the first half against them, especially the first quarter, and they come out swinging a little heavy, and you've got one of these quarterbacks in there, say it's Stetson Bennett, which I believe he will be the guy out there to start the game. If he's really struggling early on, maybe that hand gets pushed to JT Daniels a little bit faster. Maybe that's something that changes gears a little bit, and they say, all right, well, we got to reevaluate the plan right now, because right now Stetson is struggling against a Tennessee team that's really coming out swinging, and we got to make sure that we score fast enough to make sure that we don't feel like we're playing from behind. That's something Georgia really hasn't had to do all season, is play from behind. They've been down by 3 points, twice now, I think, in the first quarter. We talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it. It hasn't really had that type of situation that often. So they don't really feel comfortable doing that, I feel, at this point. I think they're comfortable, but Kirby will never tell you he's not comfortable playing in a situation like that. But I think it's a situation they would prefer not to be in regardless. And if they find themselves getting close to it or feeling like that's where they're at, maybe you do see a change pretty quick. But Tennessee, regardless, I think Tennessee's coming out swinging really heavily early in that game. I think it's going to be just like it has been in the last two seasons when they've played 2 matchups. And Tennessee comes out there and they make you nervous in the first quarter, maybe like halfway through the second quarter. But then all of a sudden, by halftime, you're like, all right, Georgia's got a lead. They're going to pull away. Third quarter comes and they just pull away the game and it's over with by the fourth quarter. That's kind of what I expect to happen this weekend personally. I don't know about you, but that's kind of the feeling that I get. And I think that could honestly maybe push a hand on the quarterback situation a little bit too.
Well, and I mean, what have you been hearing all of this week already? It's what Georgia fans have been hearing for the last 10 weeks is that this is the offense that is going to challenge Georgia. This is the offense that's going to do it. This is the one that's going to make Georgia's offense uncomfortable and force them to score points. Now, I will say this probably is the best offense that Georgia has faced this year. Hupel has done a great job with Tennessee already. I, for one, and me and you both, when we released our SEC preseason rankings, we whiffed on Tennessee by a large margin. I mean, I thought Tennessee would be horrible this year just because of the roster turnover and everything.
And to be fair, at the beginning of the season, we looked like we were right.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
the first 3 games of the season, they were struggling.
They looked horrible. I mean, they lost to a bad Pittsburgh team, and now all of a sudden they're putting up 60 points in some games. Like, it is like
something clicked, man.
Yeah, something just started to click. I don't know what it was. Maybe something in the water changed up there in Knoxville. I don't know what it was, but all of a sudden this Tennessee team starts to get rolling, and they got some momentum going. But then again, if you kind of break down Tennessee's offense, it's really not as daunting as you may think it is, especially when you have a defense like Georgia's. For starters, Tennessee runs the ball on 61% of their offensive plays. 61. So that's more than half of the game they spend running the ball. Well, what does Georgia's defense do best? They stop the run on an elite level, like better than anybody in the country by a large margin. They do a really good job of stopping the run just because, again, they have the best front 7 in the nation, and it's not even close. So then if you take away their run game, they're pretty much cooked after that, because what they do is they use their running game to set up those deep shots, and that's where they're getting teams is they kind of lull you to sleep with the run game. They get that going. They get it in chunks. And then all of a sudden they hit you with a hard play action or something and they beat you over the top. And that's how they're scoring points in bunches. But if you take out that run game, all of a sudden everything changes and they're in a position where they haven't been in a while against teams. In fact, if you look back, their 2 worst rushing performances were against Florida and against Alabama. And those 2 games, they did not fare well at all. I mean, they did not look like the team that they are right now, and they struggled to put up points. So what does that mean? You got to stop the run game, and if you do, you'll be fine, which Georgia most definitely will stop the run game.
Absolutely. And to kind of add to it that you just the number of 61% you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to go along with that, they rush for 217 yards a game as well. So in that, they get a huge amount of yardage, not just plays, but like yardage in it. The only team that's come close to doing something like that was Florida, and they had like 165 or something in the 160 range, I believe. And look how that played out for them. They still only got 3 points.
Mm-hmm.
They ran the ball really well, and they actually exposed Georgia's front 7 more than anyone has been able to so far all season, and it didn't get them anywhere. And so when you're going to really rely on that, even if you can get through to it enough, they are going to have to. The only way they get 200 yards on the ground is if they do open up the air game a little bit earlier on, so you have the linebackers having to hesitate a little bit more on those plays coming over the middle of the field, those passing plays where they feel like they've got to help out rather than crashing in. But if you're a 61% rushing team, that middle linebacking core, with Dean and Quay Walker and Tyndall, like those guys, they're going to feast on that, and they're going to be playing in those gaps. And you're not going to have a great game rushing. And so you shouldn't come in there expecting to have 217 yards on the ground. And the reason that's such a significant stat is because they only outpass their rushing yards by 23 yards a game. And so they've got 240 yards, I think, in the air.
Yeah, something like that.
240 yards versus 217 on the ground. They do outperform Georgia total offense-wise by about 25 yards or something as well. But that's not that much. Georgia's offense can very much score fast enough. I don't think that Tennessee is going to have success with the type of game plan that they've had based on that run being what they're going to, because if they're really going to rely on that running game, opening up the pass enough to be able to get those deep shots. Yeah, I do think Tennessee probably catches them once. I think there's probably I'm not saying it's even a touchdown. I think they get a 30, 45 yard play out of nowhere that just kind of catches them off guard. Yeah. Do they get 2 or 3 of those? I don't think so. No. I think that they might catch him once. But after that, it's not going to continue to happen. And that's what they need to continue to happen in order for them to actually have success against Georgia. And we talked about this before too. The only way for that teams have been successful scoring against Georgia has been long drives, time-consuming drives. Think back to Kentucky with a 22-play, 21-play drive.
10 minutes or something.
It was 11 and a half minutes or something like that. Minutes. It was almost the entire quarter of the fourth quarter that they had the ball for 21 or 22 plays, and they scored after calling timeouts and everything. That's the only way that they were able to score. And it worked because, like, at that point also Georgia's defense was playing a prevent. They let them do that. They were like, all right, if you want to grind out the entire fourth quarter, have at it.
You want to do our job for us, please do.
And you still shouldn't have scored. The only reason you were able to score is because you called timeouts multiple times at the 1 yard line because you couldn't get in.
Yeah.
I mean, Georgia was like, yeah, you can run the entire clock down. Have at that. That's fine. And Georgia's defense gives up the most points out of any quarter in the fourth quarter because it's garbage time. We were talking about this. They've given up 59 points per, in the entire season, 6.6 points per game. That's including a pick six in that stat line as well. Yes, I will go ahead and give that disclaimer for the people that will be looking at it. Be like, actually, I know it was like 5.8 or something like that without it. That's incredible on that defense. But my point stands on the fourth quarter alone. Because in the first quarter, they've given up 4 different field goals. So 12 total points in the first quarter. Yep. 4 different teams have kicked a field goal against Georgia in the first quarter. That's all any team has been able to muster there. Second quarter, 1 team has scored a touchdown.
Yep.
Third quarter, 1 team has scored a touchdown. Out of the entire 59 points they've given up all season long, they've scored 33 of them against Georgia's defense in the fourth quarter. 6 of which came on Kentucky with the last seconds of the game because they just demanded to score at the end of it, like Missouri tried to, and it didn't work this past weekend. So you really could even take some off of that as well if you really were to look at that, and it would get even more impressive on there. So my point of it is this Georgia defense only allows points in the fourth quarter because they're giving it to them, just like they did against Kentucky, where you know what, you want to run the entire fourth quarter out, have at it. Until we see a team, you and I talked about this beforehand too, until we see a team actually come out there and genuinely score 14 plus points on them, nobody can. Yeah. Like until they show that they can do it, then right now my opinion is they can't. And I don't think that changes. I don't think that Tennessee comes out there and just blows the doors off and surprises everybody. And they're the offense that Georgia hasn't faced all year because every single week that's the new narrative. Since it was Arkansas. Arkansas was the first game. I don't remember if you can correct me if you've heard somewhere else, but that was the first game that I heard was, well, they haven't played any offenses that are actually worthwhile yet.
Yeah. At first it was Clemson until Clemson got absolutely
that was the first
exposed.
Game of the season, though.
But yeah, I mean, ever since Arkansas, I mean, they said the same thing for Auburn. They said the same thing for Kentucky. They said the same thing for Florida. They didn't say it for Missouri just because Missouri is really struggling.
That was a game that Georgia was favored by, 38 points in?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely ridiculous. And then another thing that people are saying for why Tennessee might get Georgia is like, oh man, they play a really high tempo offense. Like they really get it going and they get the ball moving and they snap it quickly. Well, on the other hand, is if you're Tennessee and you're running that high tempo offense and you get a 3 and out, and then like all of a sudden you got to put your defense back on the field, maybe after them having to just getting off the field. Like, yeah, it's great to run a high tempo offense when you're having success and you're putting up sustainable drives. But when you're not finding success and you're just putting your defense right back out there after maybe like 4 minutes of being off the field or maybe even less than that, that's not a good thing because Georgia, they score quickly. But like another thing they like to do is they like to put up, again, like some long sustainable drives where they're just getting like 8 yards on a pass play, but then they get 3 on a run game. And like they put up these long drives and they just wear defenses down to when it comes to the second half, like the defense just isn't worth anything anymore because they're just worn down from the run game and just running all over the field. So if you're doing that against a team like Georgia, again, your defense is not going to fare well against Georgia's offense. So yeah, tempo is great, but Georgia forces 3 and outs like nobody's business. I mean, they don't let anybody move the ball against them. And especially if your goal is to have early down success in the run game against Georgia, you're probably not going to fare well at all. So because when you get in 3rd and longs against Georgia, we've talked about this. I mean, you're screwed. If you get in 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 9s, 3rd and 10s, you have no chance of picking up that first down, essentially, unless you can get a flag from them, something like that.
You let Georgia's edge rushers pin their ears back and just go, and then you got the linebackers that actually can step back and to actually cover extremely well. Both Dean and Quay Walker play very well in like the passing defense on it. And then also you've even had Nolan Smith drop back and get an interception playing in that type of setting where it's a third down or something like that, and they're dropping back into coverage. Good luck putting yourself in that type of situation against Georgia's defense.
And that's the thing too, is that like they don't even have to blitz necessarily to get to the quarterback, especially on third down. They're good enough to where they could just say, all right, we got our 4 guys on the defensive line. Nakobe, you take this side. Quay Walker, you take that side. And we'll be all right. We'll take our corners man-to-man or whatever, and we'll take our safeties taking out everything over the top. That's how good this defense is, because they're good enough to get to the quarterback very quickly without having to send 5 or 6 guys, without having to send Nakobe Dean on it. Now, do they do that? Yeah, and they do it really, really well, but they don't have to do that. And so when they lock you up in the passing game and they got guys coming at your quarterback really quickly, you just stand no chance. So, yes, Tennessee's offense does run a very high-tempo offense, and they have been really good at it recently. But just like everybody's saying, Georgia hasn't faced an offense like this. Tennessee dang sure ain't faced a defense like Georgia's yet. No, and nobody will until you actually play them, and if you actually play them. And that's the bottom line. So it goes both ways.
And that's the bottom line.
Yeah. And it goes both ways. So you made me lose my train of thought.
Sorry.
That's all right. I was trying to wrap that up, and I can't remember what it was, but that's all
my
right.
bad.
You guys
I started thinking about
you guys get the
wrestling
point. Like,
that's the bottom line.
yeah, you guys get the point. You know
That's
what I'm
my
trying
bad.
to say. No, it's all
I
good.
messed you up.
It's all good.
Oh man. Anyways, there's a blooper for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly. And Georgia's defense is not like any other that they have faced this
Yeah.
year. So you can't expect to come out there and score 60 points in this game. You, like we said earlier, until you can prove that you can score 14 against them, I'm saying you can't. I don't think you can. And so until you do that,
I'll believe it when I see it.
yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. So right now I'm going to say that Georgia pulls this game out and scores, they win by 20 plus points easy.
Yeah.
Like it's an easy win for them at the end of it, because I don't see their offense being able to keep up with Georgia enough because of that defensive front and that defense of Georgia as a whole. I just don't think that that's something they'll be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, yeah. I just don't. I mean, especially when you're at this point in the season, you're at the home, like past the home stretch, pretty much. You got your last 3 games. It's your last conference game. Last thing Kirby Smart wants to do, and this Georgia football team wants to do, is drop or get into trouble with their last SEC opponent. I mean, Kirby Smart is going to have his guys locked in. It's a road game. Last SEC game, you go undefeated in the East in your SEC slate. Like, that's a big deal. Finishes the only undefeated team in the entire conference. Like, that's a big deal to have. And then you can go into Charleston Southern and Georgia Tech, take care of business like you would against those teams. I mean, it's a big deal, especially when it's a 3:30 CBS game. Like, I don't know. I mean, Kirby Smart and this team is going to be ready to play against Tennessee. As they said, they have unfinished business to take care of. Stumbling all over my words right now. And they dang sure ain't going to let Tennessee get in the way of that. So,
no, absolutely not. And Tennessee is one of those teams that you gotta. They come out there and just try to hit you in the mouth. They really do. That's their style against Georgia. Has been for the past few years. We haven't seen this head coach and everything play through against Georgia yet. So we'll see how they actually match up in this match. And maybe we'll see it for 4 or 5 years afterwards, and actually see how he plays against Georgia as a whole. But this will be the first experience with that. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think you hit on something as well. This is the last SEC game of the season, and everyone's waiting to see if Georgia can go undefeated, if they can get past this one more game without having the hiccup game that everyone seems to expect Georgia to have. No matter what platform, no matter what team they cheer for, if they're not a Georgia fan, actually even Georgia fans.
Yeah,
Georgia fans, I hear so many Georgia fans say, yeah, but they're just going to choke at some point.
or slip up at some point.
It
always
point.
happens.
Well, once again, I talked about that already. I think Georgia's slip-up game, especially offensively, was against Florida, and they still won by 20-plus points, and it was still a huge victory for them. So that was their slip-up game. They really did struggle offensively. We saw how that played out. So that was the slip-up game. Now the question is, can they go through and not do that again against a Tennessee team? And I think that's why the narrative keeps being every single week. I think the reason we get that narrative of, well, they haven't played an offense like this yet. They haven't played a team, that might be able to challenge them downfield. That was something I saw this week as well. Yeah, they haven't played against a team that could actually challenge their defensive backs downfield that much. That's not even true. The teams that they've played like that, like we talked about earlier, they score a lot of points. Think about like Arkansas. Arkansas was putting the ball downfield. in every game prior to Georgia, and has done a decent amount of that throughout their season. They didn't just sit there and constantly run for 300 yards a game or something like that. Auburn didn't do that either. Like, these teams aren't sitting here just ground and pound teams scoring as many points as everybody wants to talk about the offense that they are now facing. They're trying to spread the ball out. The problem is these teams can't go deep on them because that defensive front has been so good that they don't have time to sit here and wait 4 seconds in the pocket to get a deep ball somewhere and to actually see if they can be tested. That's the real thing. The question isn't, can they actually play against a team that can challenge them downfield? It's, can a team challenge them downfield? Yeah. That's the real question. Yeah, I think there's some teams out there that might be able to challenge them downfield. We'll see how it plays out as they go into the postseason here in the SEC championship game and then potentially, a playoff spot and stuff. That'll be the question to see how it plays. But I do believe that that's why we keep getting that narrative all the time, is because everyone seems to sit back and wait and say, Georgia always chokes. They've choked the last 4 years. They've had a game where they just didn't, stand up the way they were supposed to. They lose it, and then all of a sudden everything changes. One more game, Georgia. One more game. If you can get past Tennessee, then at that point you get Charleston Southern and Georgia Tech before you get to play against whoever the SEC West opponent will be. Don't know yet officially.
Yep.
So if they can get past this one more team, everyone can sit back and say, hey, they didn't have that game, that South Carolina game, that LSU game, that Auburn game. They didn't have that game this year, that Alabama game last year, or even Florida last year. They didn't have those games this year with the result that they've had in the past years. I think they did have that game. I genuinely do think that if that defense was not as good as it is, that Florida game could have been a very different experience because of the way the offense was playing as a whole. That's why this defense is insanely good, and that's why this defense is something that fans should really just enjoy and stop sitting here focusing on why they're so mad about the offensive side of things so much. It's, man, the offense will do extremely well still because of that defense.
Yeah. And I want to point out something else as well. This is kind of been a reoccurring thing, is that because Georgia's sitting at the top, everybody wants to say oh, this team's going to challenge Georgia. This team's going to do it, blah, blah, blah. Or this is going to be the thing that finds a weakness in Georgia's defense or whatnot. So one thing that people were saying is, oh, well, just wait. If Georgia plays Ohio State in the college football playoff this year, that's they're going to be really challenged and they're going to be forced to put up points, blah, blah, blah. Georgia's defense is going to be exposed, blah, blah, blah. Well, Ohio State struggled to put up points against 3-7 Nebraska. I think they had 26, 27 points, something like that against Nebraska, and they were in a rock fight with Nebraska, 3-7 Nebraska. And just go down the list of this last weekend of college football. Alabama only beating a bad LSU team by 6 points. Everybody's been saying Alabama.
They were 1 to 2 plays away from losing that game, too. There was a couple plays that almost went the other way.
If LSU had Stetson Bennett right now, or any other quarterback for that matter, they probably beat Alabama.
Take it easy on Max Johnson. And
I get
County
it.
boy.
I get it. He's Mark Richt's nephew, all that stuff. That's a great story. But bottom line, he ain't that good of a quarterback. But
he just doesn't have a lot around him.
He had 2 chances. Now. I mean, he had 2 possessions with a chance to take the lead against Alabama. They just couldn't punch it in the end zone. But that was another team. Everybody's been saying that. Oh, well, if they play Alabama, they're really going to be challenged. Find me anybody right now, and I mean anybody, where you watch them play and you say, yeah, that offense looks like they could beat this Georgia defense right now.
Who are you going to name? Because Clemson's, been the team in the past as well. Oklahoma's been that team. Oklahoma is just
I maybe could give you Oklahoma because they kind of got things rolling with a new quarterback.
They're struggling every game though. Still, they've barely squeaked by and won all of their games. Yeah, they're undefeated. They're the team that has struggled every single week. Maybe they've turned some stuff around a little bit now with Caleb Williams. That I don't know. I didn't really pay attention to this last weekend.
I don't think they played this last week.
They didn't play this weekend?
I don't think so. I may be wrong, though, but I don't think they did.
But either way, I don't know. But they've still struggled even the first game that he got put in, and they were still struggling in that game. Ohio State's been a team that scored a lot of points offensively and have done a lot. But like you said, they are struggling right now versus teams like Nebraska. And Alabama still has a decent offense, but they have struggled massively against teams like LSU and they lost to Texas A&M. Yeah, they scored a decent amount of points in that game, but they still lost that game. And there's not a team out there that's just offensively dominant to the same standard that Georgia's defensively dominant. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's a team out there right now that can stand with Georgia, head to head versus that defense right now. I don't think there's that team out there. And maybe that'll change over the next couple weeks. Maybe somebody will start to separate themselves and become that team, and we'll see. Because it'll be a while before we get to see that type of matchup. Anyways, that won't be till January because SEC championship game is going to be. I don't know who that's going to be right now. I was going to say Alabama officially. Like that, I think that's where we were sitting for the longest time. It's like it's going to be Alabama. But they started to struggle. If an Auburn team comes out there and just really catches them off guard, all of a sudden, maybe we get a Texas A&M.
Look,
or an Auburn or somebody.
I saw a tweet today that there is still an open scenario to where Arkansas can get in the SEC championship game right now.
That's one of those so you're saying there's
Alabama
a chance kind of thing.
Out, that kind of scenario.
That's one of those. So you're saying there's a chance kind of scenario.
But still, that is crazy.
But theoretically,
to think
yes.
about.
The West is wide open right now.
Technically, Arkansas is still alive. I don't think Auburn is still alive anymore after they lost this last weekend. I don't know that they're still alive.
How many losses do they have? 3?
They have 3.
So they're out.
They lost to Penn State, us, and then they lost to Texas A&M just now. So,
but they've got 2 SEC losses.
I don't know. We'll say so
they've got 2 SEC, so they're still in it then because if they have 2 SEC losses, and that's because they lost to Penn State. That's their 3rd loss. So they only have 2 SEC losses right now. They are still in it because if they beat Alabama, they'll have 2 SEC losses as well. Right. And they get the tie. Now that would be very interesting because Texas A&M and Auburn have,
they lost. Auburn would need Texas A&M to lose a game. That's what.
Texas A&M would have to lose another game at that point because
Auburn
Texas A&M would still be.
Auburn does not control their own destiny.
Now they can shake everything else up. Yeah, Texas A&M doesn't even control their own destiny at this point.
And Alabama is.
That's the only one that actually controls their destiny.
They are the only ones right now that still control their own destiny. But still. You just never know what could happen in the late months. But rivalry week, that's a big thing too. Crazy things seem to happen during that week. So, just look at it from that point of perspective, Georgia fans. Look at the West right now. You could be in that. You could be in that situation right now. But instead,
usually that's where the East looks like. Yeah.
But right now, instead, you're going into Tennessee, already locked up the SEC championship game, and then also, if you win out like you should for the rest of the season. You will also pretty much can go into Atlanta and not necessarily care what the result is, and you'll still be in the college football playoff. Now, it still matters. That's a big deal. That you still definitely want to win Atlanta, but that's a big thing. That's another level of comfort that you would like to have. Of course, you'd rather be that team than on the flip side and be in a must-win game for the rest of the season. So, just look at it from that perspective. It is absolute madness in the West. I'm here for it. Can't wait to watch that unravel. I would be absolutely crazy if Texas A&M somehow find a way with Zach Calzada at quarterback to make it to Atlanta. That'd be pretty remarkable. Take out Alabama. Wouldn't have to worry about that. So that's a big thing. Still a lot of football relatively to be played. 3 more weeks. So
some big games for some other people out there. Georgia gets one more SEC opponent to take care of business with before they
everybody loves beating down Georgia Tech. That's always
that's going to be a fun one, right?
It's always a good time, right?
Yeah, so that'll be a fun one to watch and see how that plays out for us there. So, but yeah, I think that's something that people got to sit back and really realize as Georgia fans right now. I think the playoff predictor gives Georgia a 92 or 93% chance of making the playoffs right now, and that's because all they have to do at this point is get past Tennessee, Charleston Southern, and Georgia Tech. And then at that point, if they can clean sweep those last 3 teams, which they're massive favorites in all of those games, they're going to be probably what's the spread this weekend? Do you know? I don't know.
I haven't
even paid attention at all, actually. So I have to go back and look.
Try and look at it real quick.
But they'll be favored by 40-plus points against Charleston Southern, 30-plus to 40 points against Georgia Tech potentially as well. So right now, if you can clean sweep that and go into an SEC championship game against somebody.
Georgia is favored by 20 right now against
20.
Tennessee.
Okay, so it's a 20-point favorite right now. So that's right around where I would assume it would be.
Yep.
So you get past those games, and then all of a sudden it doesn't even matter what happens in the SEC championship game. No matter who it is, you can lose it.
You could make the argument Georgia could almost get blown out and still make it just because of how good they've looked for
they would have the
all
argument.
The other 10 games or 11 games or 12 games.
They would have the argument to say, they lost that one game, but that's the only team that's even come close to doing anything against them all season.
Yeah.
And so they have the argument, especially with the way that college football as a whole is shaked out. There's a lot of one-loss teams out there.
Yeah, you just have to say, well, look at everybody else.
Everyone else has one loss, and they haven't looked. There's teams out there that haven't looked good. It's one of those things that, that's going to be interesting to see. But my other thing that I was going to say on that too is when it gets to an SEC championship game, it's a neutral site. Mm-hmm. That's a very big thing for Georgia as well. It's a neutral site game, so you don't even have to worry about going into Bryant-Denny or Kyle Field or somewhere like that, if it is Texas A&M or in Alabama, you get to go to Atlanta, where
right in your backyard,
where you have a lot of experience playing. Georgia fans are going to be in plenty. You're going to almost have home field advantage there. You put that with that defense that you have, and I'm going to put my money on Georgia
every single time,
and just ride that one out. So I think they have a very good chance at beating. At this point, I would say they have a very good chance of beating Alabama in that game.
Oh, yeah.
Before 6 weeks ago, we would have talked about it and said, you know what, like that's a game that I don't have a clue. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Georgia has a very good chance of being able to pull that one off. I'm not guaranteeing a win or anything like that, but at this point, Bama is very beatable.
You should like Georgia's odds against any team right now.
Any team in the country.
Anybody right now.
No matter who, you should like their odds against them right now. Yep. But yeah, I mean, that's the episode for the week from what I've got.
I got nothing else, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as always, keep it classy in the Classic City, and we will catch you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Dogs Daily on Sports Illustrated. Take a second to subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends and family. Feel free to reach out to the Dogs Daily crew on Twitter with any topics you'd like discussed. You can reach out to Jeremiah at Jeremiah_Stod7, to Kyle at DK Fubderberg, and Jonathan at 22_Jman. Check back next week for a brand new episode. In the meantime, go Dogs!